ordinarily, we probably would not frown at such numbers that 93% of the population attend public primary schools. But the issue here is the quality of public primary schools. And then going back to history as well, a couple of years ago, to be precise, in Kwara State, there was an assessment done on about 19,125 public primary school teachers. Only 7 of them passed the assessments. They were assessed on...
Did you say 7?
7, not 7%.
Out of
19,125 public primary school teachers. They were assessed on primary 4 level mathematics.
Oh.
Only 7 of them passed.
What became of the rest?
Oh, there were 10 first degree holders. They scored 0. But this is not a case that is peculiar to that state. In Kaduna State, 1,599 teachers were assessed on similar tests. Only 1 scored above 75%. 80% of them scored less than 25%. Recently, a couple of weeks back, the Kogi State government were trying to do an audit of the state primary teachers, about 23,000 of them. And they found out that 20% of them, that's about 4,800 teachers, couldn't accurately spell their names. These are facts.
Whoa.
Out of 23,000 teachers.
How can that be?
And the one who
spell their names.
They couldn't accurately spell their names.
State, the teacher before the governor, who also couldn't read in Edo State. In all of this, these are some of what would term developments that should always be in the positives. So if we look at our education system, and these are some of the results you've been able to pull out of it, and these are supposed to be the caregivers or the teachers who should impart some kind of knowledge in those that will become the future leaders. What does that tell you?
I totally agree with you. It creates a bad story. Clearly, on the educational sector, it is hard to justify that we are where we should be. Though we've made some gains on the educational sector, so I'll give you an example. Between 1960 to the early 90s, the teacher-pupil ratio in most schools was about 40.
To a teacher?
To a teacher. So you had about 40 students to a teacher. The government has made significant improvements in that case, as of today, whereby the teacher-pupil ratio is about 32. So clearly, we've made significant progress in the number of students that are allocated to a teacher.
The worry now is not the kind of teacher.
The worry now is the kind of teacher. So if you have a case where you have a state that has 4,800 teachers, about 5,000 teachers that can't accurately spell their names, and each of those teachers has access to 30 students. Clearly, what we're going to be having is, if you just do the maths, you'll be having about 150,000 students that would, from primary school, be unemployable.
And yet, we've had more certificates awarded over the last years.
Clearly.
What effect would you say population has also had on our data and resources? I mean, you're talking about, say, recurrent expenditure and capital expenditure. Obviously, the number of people who are getting paid, say, from the 58% of recurrent expenditure are far more than the number of people being paid from, possibly the same 58% or 60% allocated to recurrent expenditure today.
Yeah, we could, I agree with you. In 1960, the data we have suggests that there were 45 million. Our population in 1960, they're about 45 million. Today, we're hovering between 167, possibly 170 million. So we've effectively quadrupled in size, and we've successfully been able to have all Nigerians still within the same boundary. But the effects on the budget, clearly, with more mouths, we need more resources, and that's why one of the arguments I easily put is our budgeting our budget, the way we've historically done our budgets has been problematic. So historically, what we've focused on right from 1960, if you go through the records, is the budget's decision has been based on allocation. So we have defense, health, education, and then we argue on how resources will be allocated. What that does is we worry about how the cake is being shared rather than focusing on the size of the cake.
And you said this has been from the 60s.
This has been from the 60s. So from the 60s, the budgeting decision has always been, how do we allocate resources? The focus has never been on how do we increase resources. And like I said a while ago, the 2013 budget was premised on about 4.9 trillion naira thereabout, and there's currently a plan to reduce the government's budget in 2014 based on scarce resources as it is discussed. But because we've always focused on how we allocate our resources rather than how we want to increase the resources, we totally miss the point. And I'll give you some examples. In the United States, for instance, they have a population of about 315 million people. The government budgets about $18,800 per person. In Nigeria, we have a budget of about $212 per person. So effectively, the government budgets about 88 times what the Nigerian government budgets per person, per head. If we don't want to use the instance of the United States being an extreme case, for example, we look at Brazil, that has similar population to us, about 193 million. The Brazilian budget per person by the government is about $5,000. That's about 25 times our budget. Similar, but if you look at Russia, the Russian population is slightly below us, about 143 million Russians.
But no matter how, sorry to interrupt you there, no matter how many, how much we are or how many we are, some people will say that a budget essentially is about allocating scarce resources, so that no matter how many resources you have, they always seem never to be enough.
I agree with you, but that should be the second approach. The first approach should be, how much money do we need to spend? And like I said, if we don't want to even compare ourselves with any of the far more advanced countries like I'd mentioned, let's compare ourselves with South Africa. The South African government budgets $2,200 per person. That is 10 times our budget. Effectively, what our budget should be as at today, compared to other countries, we should be looking at a budget of about 47 trillion naira, not 4.7 trillion naira. That is the issue. As long as we look at 4.7 trillion naira, we want to move to 5 trillion naira, we want to move to 5.5 trillion naira, we will have this discussion again in another 53 years.
So you're saying that essentially what differentiates us from these other countries that you mentioned is that they're looking at how much they want to spend on a person rather than how much they should allocate to each sector, for instance?
They look at how much they should allocate to each sector, which is important. But most importantly, what the budget per person allows you to get is, it allows you to reduce the incidence of poverty. It allows you to improve the standard and quality of life of your citizens. Effectively, what will happen is, as long as we are working on the premise of a 4.9, a 5 trillion, a 4.8 trillion budget, a 6 trillion budget, we would always fight and argue on how we will allocate those resources, because those resources will never be enough.